Identity in Space Station 14 is an important topic and one that might not always have the most clear explanation. Your identity is, well, how people identify you. You're just somebody who has an ID on, and you have your face uncovered. People, everyone around you, will be able to inspect you and see your character's name, either through the right-click menu, which they will see the name, or by shift-clicking they will see your name. Identity also works in the way that even if you don't have an ID, and your face is still exposed, people can still see your real name. So I don't have my ID on me, but people can still see I am indeed the same person. If you wear certain masks, like breath masks, it still does not hide your identity. I am still just my character's name. However, this changes when you get things like gas mask. It completely obscures your face, and it will then become a description of your character. For example, this character is set up to be a middle-aged human man with male pronouns. This will dynamically change to whatever your species is, whatever gender you are, and how old you are. And you can always shift-click somebody as well and click the little person icon to see their ID. ID also works, though, if you have it in your hand or have it equipped. Having it in your pocket slot does not count. That is just one little thing to be reminded of. So, how does identity work if you have somebody else's ID? So this is John Smith's ID. So if I hold it in my hand, I am now identified as John Smith. However, what could throw people off, and you could use this for your advantage, or it could be a disadvantage, is if you're holding in your hand, it will say they are holding, he, she, whatever, is holding that ID card. However, you could put it in your old PDA, and if people look at you, well, your name is John Smith, and if they identify you through the PDA, well, yeah, there you go. It is still John Smith. However, if I were to take my mask off, I am now back to my original character, because that is what I'm identified as. And if you shift-click it, then it becomes very apparent you have a stolen ID. So that is something to keep in mind. And that is essentially the basics of how ID works. Now, what happens if you get something like a hard suit? Well, if you wear a hard suit and put the helmet on, I'm again John Smith because my face is hidden. It's a pretty general rule. There's a few weird exceptions where your face isn't totally hidden and yet you can still lose your identity. But if you ever just want to know if your identity is working, you can just shift-click yourself. And also, without a voice mask, if you talk, it will still show your real name up in the chat bar, so you can't really fool people that way. And if, like, you do an emote, though, like waves, John Smith waves, John Smith cries. So you can emote to fool people in that regard because, well, you're just doing an emote, so people shouldn't know that it's your voice attached to your character. There's weird exceptions where if you slip, you can even see the soda spills on Tyrone Williams. Well, what's weird is that my character's name is John Smith, and if you slip in it, and it spreads reagents on you, it will say that. However, thankfully, people can't give you away by hugging. It will just still say, hug John Smith. So people can't check you in that regard. I'm sure there's a few weird examples of your identity being revealed incorrectly, but the most common one is going to be reagents getting splashed on you. That is definitely not intended and can cause issues. Now, Syndicate agents have more advanced ways of hiding their identity than a normal person. Syndicates can purchase things like agent ID cards, and they can purchase a voice mask. The agent ID card is a card that lets you change your name to whatever you want. So I could just become Bob, just Bob, and put that into my PDA. Now I am Bob, and if you ever don't want that name, you can change it at any time. However, it gets interesting with the gas mask. If you change your name to Bob and talk, well, now everyone around you will know that your name is Bob. You'll sound like Bob, and if they inspect you quickly, your ID is still Bob. However, if you take your helmet off and your mask off, I am not Bob, and I will not sound like Bob. What's interesting is you can try to fool people with this. The mask is chameleon, so you could swap it to something like a breath mask, which doesn't traditionally hide your ID, but then you gotta be careful because, or it doesn't traditionally hide your face, but then you gotta be careful because now my real name's exposed, but if I talk, I'm talking as Bob still. So that is one example of it also possibly screwing you. So I would still recommend you just keep your face looking like however ID you're trying to steal or what you're trying to warrant as. And just by the way, if you aren't using a stolen ID and you're using an agent ID card, you won't appear on the crew manifest. So if I check the manifest, there's no one named Bob. And people will, again, often use that against you. A new item was also added to the game. It is called the DNA Scrambler implant, which is, again, now a more advanced way of hiding your identity. If you inject yourself with it, you'll get an action on the left called Scramble DNA, and it quite literally transforms you into an entirely new person. So now I am actually Alexis Allen, but you still won't be on the manifest. But by being a totally unique person not on the manifest, that could fool people in its own way. And what's really cool about this is you can swap back to your original appearance at any time, but you can't go back. Once you swap once and swap back, that's it. So that is basically the final way of obscuring your identity. I don't believe I missed anything. I mean, there's a few advanced scenarios I could think of that I didn't cover, but overall, this is still a pretty general write-up of how identity works in the game, and hopefully will answer some questions.